Hey guys, Coach Micah here. In our last video, we introduced ourselves to the upcoming resolution. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. If you have seen it and you're still wondering what the resolution might be saying, then I have the perfect tool for you. I actually just released a resolutional analysis document on my Patreon. The link will be in the description. It's a 15-page document that goes much deeper into the resolution, talks about the affirmative burden, the negative burden, and answers a lot of questions that you may have going into this season. So if that's something that interests you, please go check it out. I would appreciate the support. The topic of today's video is actually a behind-the-scenes look into how I, as a coach, research resolutions in order to give me a better understanding of what exactly I am coaching. And of course, if I'm going to create a source book or a case book, or I'm going to just know about the resolution in general, I need to do research. So I'm super happy that I'll be able to bring you along with me on a quick research session as we try to figure out exactly what this resolution has in store for us. Over the years, I've learned how to optimize my research and analyzing the credibility and the significance of different sources, because how you research can determine the advantage that you have over your opponent in a round. Research is important for two main reasons. The first is that in an ethics debate like Lincoln Douglas, you have to be able to understand the big picture idea, i.e. the philosophy and the logic that lay the foundation to the arguments that you are making. Having that understanding is key to your refutation as well as your rhetoric. Secondly, LD resolutions are linked to the real world and thus require some amount of data in order to back up claims that you make. For example, if you were to make the argument that diplomacy works 9 out of 10 times, you will have to bring up examples, several of them, that prove this statistic. Any claim that you make has to be backed up by data, which is why you need research. And that's what we're going to be discussing in today's video. So let's get right to it. When I'm about to have an epic research session, the first thing that I do is create a Google document specifically as a landing page for any links that I find to articles or sources. I'll also write down different questions I may have that I'll want to answer later, and just generally anything else that I find interesting as I research. Once I have the landing page down, I'm going to start by just typing in the entire resolution. One of the reasons I do this is because I have Google, and Google provides an AI overview. I'm not sure what other search engines use, or if they have an AI tool, but when I type something in the search bar, the AI overview pulls from all the different sources on the internet that could answer that question and gives it to me in a summary. So if I want to just get a general understanding of what the resolution is saying, then I should just type in the entire resolution and see what pops up. So let's read. In foreign policy, diplomacy is generally considered a more effective approach than military intervention. Diplomacy focuses on peaceful negotiations and cooperation to resolve conflicts and achieve foreign policy goals, while military intervention often carries significant risks, including loss of life, economic costs, and potential for long-term instability. That's all really interesting, and this is something we'll get into later, but you'll notice that it is taking the position of the affirmative in this case. And that's because when you enter something into the search bar, the internet will pop up with examples that support that claim. If I were to type in diplomacy saves lives, it will pull up analysis that supports that claim. Vice versa, military intervention saving lives? Yep, absolutely supported. And here is the evidence for that. This little link shows me where it got that information, and it looks like it compiled from 4 different sources. From the US Embassy and Consulates in Italy, from Coursera, from the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and from Beyond Intractability. So these are all interesting sources, and it looks like that's where the information came from. Once I've Googled the entire resolution and I'm starting to get a general idea of what we're going to be discussing today, I want to go even further. And I'm going to do that by defining the terms. So first, I want to figure out what foreign policy is. What is foreign policy? By typing that in, I get the AI overview. Foreign policy refers to a country's overall strategy and actions in its relationships with other nations and international organizations. Okay, great. Let's find a source that's going to help me out here. Something I could potentially quote and bring into a round. We have Notre Dame International Security Center. What are the 4 types of foreign policy and how are they pursued? Just based off of that, I'm going to click on that. Let's see here. Okay, so we have imperialism, diplomacy, isolationism and neutrality, and collective security. So this doesn't really give us a definition of what foreign policy is as a whole, but different kinds. So I am going to copy this link and I'm going to paste it in my document because that's interesting information that I want to have for later. But I still want to know what foreign policy is. So let's go to what is foreign policy, blog UE or Universidad Europa. I don't know if that would be as credible because it's from a different country. Maybe. And that's something we want to point out here. This resolution does not specify the United States. It's just talking about in foreign policy. So absolutely a European foreign policy strategy would link to the resolution. So let's click on that. Foreign policy is the set of decisions and actions that make up the public policy of a government to protect the well-being of its citizens. This is an interesting definition because it specifically talks about a strategy of protection. It gives a little bit of oomph to the definition of foreign policy. It's not just relationships between countries. It's a public policy the government makes to protect the well-being of its citizens. And I think this would be a really good definition, especially for neg, because if foreign policy is about protection, I might be able to argue that diplomacy does not protect its citizens. And it looks like this resolution also, or this source, has the main objectives of foreign policy and talks about the different strategies for the different things it seeks to achieve. Some historical examples as well. That is all interesting. So I think I'm going to keep that for later. Now that I know what foreign policy is, what is diplomacy? And in this case, we're talking about diplomacy within the context of foreign policy. It says here, diplomacy in international relations is the practice of establishing and maintaining peaceful relationships between nations through negotiation, communication, and other forms of non-violent interaction. And this is pulled from Encyclopedia Britannica. Encyclopedia Britannica is one of my favorite sources because they give us a lot of information. Take, for example, this article here. We have the history of diplomacy, we have examples of modern diplomatic practice, and of course we have the root of the idea and the word. The term diplomacy is derived via French from the ancient Greek diploma, XYZ. And it says here that diplomacy is the established method of influencing the decisions and behavior of foreign governments and peoples through dialogue, negotiation, and other measures short of war or violence. Now that's key, because if diplomacy included war, which is synonymous with military intervention, then diplomacy would also be military intervention, which would make no sense in the case of this debate. So this means we're talking about diplomacy is short of war or violence. Before we continue, we need to analyze the different types of sources out there, because at the end of the day, I want to be efficient. I don't want to spend 10 hours on the internet, and I don't want to constantly be clicking links that sound interesting, but in actuality have nothing to say. We have mainstream news, we have archives, usually coming from a collective source, a government website, for example. There's also academic resources, books, essays, and journals, things written by a host of professionals or one particular professional and his ideas and analysis, such as a study. And of course, you have things like encyclopedias. Encyclopedia Britannica is one. You also have Wikipedia, which is really good for just giving a general understanding of how the resolutions work. In terms of general understanding, obviously, we don't go around quoting Wikipedia. Why is that? It's because Wikipedia is a collection of different sources. So you have to actually go to the source that posted their information on Wikipedia. Whereas Encyclopedia Britannica is their own source. So we can quote them. There are three elements to a source that are really important, and highlighting one of those three can influence the rhetoric that you use in a case. For example, you have the source itself. Some sources, just the sheer weight of their name, evokes credibility. For example, according to the National Association of blank. So I'm not quoting an author, I'm not citing a date, I'm just saying according to this source itself. And national associations of blank are usually a credible source. And so when I'm Googling different sources, I will look for that description in the bottom of the window of the little website Google brings up. The second, of course, is the date. If I were to quote something that happened 4 years ago, that's going to have a different impact than if I were to quote an article that came out 2 seconds ago, 2 minutes, hours, or even 2 days ago. And how I bring that up into a round might actually help my rhetoric. For example, Judge, my opponent has brought up many good examples, but I want to bring to your attention something that happened just a day ago. Another part of an article is the author. Who wrote the article? Sometimes authors who are more distinguished may write for articles that don't have the same impact in their own name. Like the New York Post doesn't really have an impact, but maybe the New York Post hired someone who is very reputable to write for them. So I instead am going to specifically refer to the author. According to Professor XYZ with 50 different years of experience, he had this to say, end quote. So these are the things that I'm looking for whenever I'm doing research. I look for the type of the source, and I'm very mindful about exactly what I'm getting because there are opinion pieces out there, there are think pieces, think tanks, things like that. I'm also looking to the weight and the gravity of the source, and if I don't know what the source is, I'll always click on the About page so that I can get to know it better. I'm going to figure out who the author is. Was it one author? Was it multiple authors? How do I address that person or those persons? And of course, when was the article written? When did it come out? How relevant is it to us and our arguments in the moment? So now that we understand that, let's continue our research, and we got to figure out what military intervention means. Military intervention is the deliberate introduction of a nation's or group of nations' military forces into the course of an existing controversy with the aim of influencing the situation. Let's break that down really quick. It's saying that according to this here, and we'll even click on the link to see which sources it pulled this from, military intervention is exactly what it sounds like. It is intervening into a current conflict using your military. Now, there are different types of military operations and there's different levels, but that's what we're referring to. This is not the only type of military intervention. If you want to learn about the other one and the significance of it on the resolution, then once again, go check out the document that I have available on Patreon at the moment. But according to the AI overview, we have key aspects of military intervention: involvement of military forces, interference in another state's affairs, aiming to influence outcomes. Those are really interesting. Let's find a source that specifically defines what military intervention is. Something I can quote, because I can't quote the Google AI overview. We have the Tools for Atrocity Prevention, Patricia Sullivan, PhD. This is the Journal of Peace Research. Sometimes I will go down to the People Also Ask section. What is the meaning of military intervention? And we have ScienceDirect.com. ScienceDirect is an example of a library that hosts a lot of academic journals and different areas of study, things like that. At the very top here, we have military intervention refers to the involvement of armed forces in a conflict or crisis situation to address security concerns or restore peace, often accompanying humanitarian operations in complex political emergencies. So this definition is very specific in going into what military intervention does. And it says it's an AI-generated definition based on the International Encyclopedia of Human Geography. That's great, but I want something that is actually the definition. I don't want an AI generation for something to quote in an actual round. I'm going to refine my search and instead say military intervention definition. I just have Google show me the definition. Okay, so we have IGI Global. And IGI Global looks like it is a publishing company right here, scientific publishing. And this is according to a book. So this would also be something really interesting, but I don't want to have to bring up the entire book. I guess it also gives the source right here. A power relation between two states which entails movement of forces of one or more countries into the land or water jurisdiction of another state, aimed at altering its political dynamics while being limited in scope and time. Okay, so this is specifically referring to political dynamics, and it's published in the chapter Military Intervention as an International Normative Custom and Human Security. I think I am going to copy this because that seems like something I would read later. And that's another thing too, if you want to go all out and spend some money on getting resources or access to journals, go to the library and get books to help your understanding, go for it. I love that mindset. I want to know as much as possible, and doing something like that will help me achieve that. So according to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, this would be an example of a credible source. A military intervention is the deliberate act of a nation or group of nations to introduce its military forces into the course of an existing controversy. According to the Department of Defense 2010, page 153, and look, it gives us the entire 482-page Department of Defense Dictionary of military and associated terms. So this is an extremely credible source. It is a whole dictionary of military and associated terms. See, this is also one of the things, it's like finding random treasure when you're searching. So I'm going to absolutely copy this because that is going to be a really helpful resource, and I could even probably find a definition of diplomacy in there somewhere. But now we know what the resolution is talking about. We know the terms. Now we just need to find examples. I want to start us off and kind of give you something to start looking for here. We're going to start with an example that's actually happening right now. Iran and Israel. So let's type in Iran versus Israel. Just off the bat, we have the top stories because this is the news. We have CNN, Al Jazeera, NBC, Reuters, AP, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, etc. Now, just looking off of these sources, I can already see which ones I want to click on and which ones I'm going to avoid. I generally will try to avoid the mainstream media news outlets, for example, CNN or Fox News. And that's because they are known for being politically biased, and they're not always as credible. They can get some things wrong. So if I'm going to choose a biased source, I'm going to do the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times 100%. But in this case, I am going to go to the live as of 26 minutes ago, Al Jazeera. Live, Iran launches new attacks on Israel. Okay, so what I'm doing with these examples is I'm searching these articles to see if there's any charged language. Is there anything that indicates diplomacy is good, military intervention is good, or vice versa? So first off, Iran launches new attacks on Israel. That would be an example of a military strike. But we know from a couple days ago that it was technically Israel that started the attack. They attacked Iran's nuclear facilities, well, at least what they believe to be nuclear facilities, as a preemptive strike in order to get rid of that threat. So now looks like Iran is fighting back. So that means that there are consequences to military intervention, just off the bat. If Israel is going to intervene militarily into a situation that they believe is going to bring them harm in the future, the consequence of that is that they are going to be attacked by the person they were attacking. So maybe we want to choose diplomacy because diplomacy will prevent another country from attacking you, getting back at you. Let's click on that New York Times article and see if there's anything, because this was live as of 10 minutes ago. So live updates, Israel and Iran trade attacks as conflict enters fourth day. So we have 4 days of conflict. It gives us a little video here. It says, here's the latest. Israel and Iran traded new attacks early on Monday as the most intense fighting between two countries in decades entered its fourth day, with international pleas for de-escalation falling on deaf ears. Okay, so this statement is really important. There are international pleas, which connotates multiple countries are looking at the situation and telling them to stop. You need to pursue diplomacy. And it seems like they're not listening. They want to continue engaging in war. They want to continue fighting, and maybe or maybe not, there is a justified reason for doing that. And here's another helpful tip. When it comes to finding examples, you are not trying to beat your opponent. You're trying to win over the judge. So some judges might be pro-Israel, and some judges might not be pro-Israel. Justified war kind of depends on what you find is considered justified war, and that will depend on the judge. So when you are looking at these examples, you need to be objective and put yourself in their shoes. If I was a country and I believed there was a country that hated me that had nuclear weapons, would I step in? You can make claims like that to take away some of the politically charged connotations from these articles. But what we're seeing here is that there are pleas for de-escalation. So maybe that's an example of where military intervention failed and diplomacy would have been better. But also, who actually wants to engage and negotiate with terrorists? I don't think that's something you can do, but that's what Israel says is the alternative, negotiating with terrorists, which means that they believe that their action is justified. We have at least 29 people were injured in the latest attack. with the Iranian missiles on Israel. We also have 67 others were injured across 4 sites in Israel, and I believe there have been over 100 people in Tehran, which is a city in Iran, that have been killed. So people have already been dying. So this type of example is something that I'm going to keep for the future and figure out whether or not it supports my side of the resolution or disproves my opponent's side of the resolution, if that makes sense. Another example we can look to is actually Ukraine and Russia. And the thing about this is they are currently fighting, so there was military intervention. But according to this AI overview here, while direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine on a ceasefire have largely failed, both countries are actively engaged in diplomatic efforts to shape the international context of the war. So just off that AI overview, and this is something I have seen in other sources, they were fighting, but now diplomacy is stepping in to see if it can actually solve the problem. So maybe that's an argument for diplomacy. Diplomacy solves the problems. It achieves the value, for example. Let's go to the strategist here, and this is a source according to the 1st of April Fools, April 2025. Diplomacy is the newest front in the Russia-Ukraine war. That was 2 months ago, so I'm going to try to find something a little bit more current because a lot can happen in 2 months. Reuters, 7 hours ago, Russia says it struck oil refinery that supplies Ukrainian army with fuel. So this is a headline that communicates to us we are still engaged in an active conflict. These two nations are still engaged in an active conflict. And of course, as the affirmative, I could say this is bad, we need diplomacy. Or as the negative, I could say diplomacy didn't work, so this was the only option. So these are 2 examples that you'll really want to figure out in terms of what they actually say. Because I guarantee you they're very popular, and I can see a lot of competitors using them. But another one is actually the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And this is according to the Council on Foreign Relations, which is also another source. They are a source that has the weight of the name, for example. China's colossal infrastructure investments may usher in a new era of trade and growth for economies in Asia and beyond, but skeptics worry that China is laying a debt trap for borrowing governments. What China is doing is they are going around the world and creating trade partners with different countries and different governments. But how are they doing it? Are they doing it via diplomacy? Are they creating and negotiating with countries? Or are they invading countries with their military? Are they threatening war? Is threatening war an act of diplomacy or military intervention? I like to lean that it's military intervention, but we can get into that later. This would be an example of saying diplomacy is what leads to economic growth, so diplomacy is good. But also we could argue that we don't want China to have diplomatic relation with all these countries. Skeptics worry that China is laying a debt trap for borrowing governments, so maybe we should put a stop to that. Should we use diplomacy to put a stop to it, or should we invade militarily to put a stop to it? Again, this might be a question that we address and an application that we have providing analysis that supports diplomacy or supports military intervention. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, what do I do if I don't already have some idea of what's going on in the real world? I mean, after all, Coach Micah, you've debated preemptive warfare as morally justified, and you also follow up on current events more than I do. So how would I know what to look for? And that's a really good question. Again, we want to be really specific with how we do our Google searches. So let me show you something that's going to be really helpful as you research. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, whatever you type in the search bar, the AI overview is going to find articles and analysis that supports what you typed in. So if I were to type in military intervention is good, it will bring analysis that supports that claim. If I type in diplomacy is good, it will bring sources that support that claim. So I need to create a claim. Even if it's not necessarily true, I need to claim it, and there will be sources brought to me. So diplomacy saves lives. Let's see what it says. U.S. diplomacy helps prevent local conflicts from becoming wider wars that could threaten our allies, embroil American troops, and create instability in key regions. And in the best tradition of America, we respond to humanitarian crisis to help save lives, according to the U.S. Department of State. I want to further refine my search. Examples of diplomacy saving lives. All right. The Dayton Peace Accords in 1995, brokered by the United States, ended the Bosnian War, which had claimed at that point over 200,000 lives. So they saw the massive loss of life and they decided to prevent more from happening. Okay. We also have, during the war in Ukraine, diplomacy enabled the Black Sea Grain Initiative, allowing for the export of Ukrainian grain and alleviating potential famine. So that's an interesting way to save lives, is keep people from starving. We also have the U.S. declassified information about Putin's intentions, which, now this says it was ultimately unsuccessful in preventing invasion. So this would be an example where we don't want to pull from. And just know, these are all things other people could look up. Like, the internet is free for people to use. So you want to not rely on just the AI overview. It's simply giving us a guideline to where we can look deeper. So right here, Dayton Peace Accords, I'm going to look into that. I'm also going to look into the Black Sea Grain Initiative as examples of diplomacy saving lives. We have stories of diplomacy. We have Diplomacy Works, first-person stories from the field. Those might be good examples to give some of that passion. You also have A Diplomat Risks His Life to Save Americans. The Role of Diplomacy in a Connected World. So every time I type in a claim, it is going to support that claim. If I'm going to talk about how good diplomacy is, I also need to talk about how bad military intervention is. And it says here that one of the reasons that military intervention can fail is, one, it's the lack of local support. So people don't really like what's going on with these wars. They don't support their government. Examples of such interventions that faced challenge and considered to be failures, according to the AI overview, was the interventions in Somalia, Haiti, Afghanistan, and Iraq. So those are 4 different examples that I could look to that show how military intervention failed. So now I have everything I need. All I have to do is just, again, research by typing into the search bar those examples, and they will pull up stuff for me that I can use later. Super helpful tool when I'm researching. There is so much more information out on the internet that will help you to develop different arguments. Just know the difference. There are sources that are for you, and there are sources that are for your audience. Sources that are going to give you a better understanding just as background knowledge, but you're not actually going to read into a round. And the credible sources that you're going to bring into a round that will help engage with your judge and give you the best advantage over your opponent. Now that you know how to research, you should use this information to start writing cases. And you may be thinking to yourself, this is a lot of information. How do I even start writing cases? Well, stay tuned for our next video, because that's exactly what we will be doing together. We will be writing cases using some of the information that we have gained from this epic research session. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate your support. And once again, if you are looking forward to more resources and more help that I will be creating for these resolutions for the season and hopefully for many seasons to come, then please check out my Patreon page. I already have some resources that you would be really interested in there, and some of them are only the price of a cup of coffee. If you're interested in getting coaching, or you want to look deeper into how you can improve your craft and how you can have the best advantage going into future tournaments and even Night Talk, then please reach out to me at coachmicahdiaz@gmail.com. I would be happy to help you, and I've got a flexible schedule, so let's get this thing done. Thanks again for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.